Futurama comic, issue 33. Zoidberg tells the crew that Farnsworth is a vegetable, and after they see that he's fine, Q-Bert says he's talking about the modified carrot he made using a sample of Farnsworth's DNA for their science fair. Fry says that when he went to the science fair with the most cliche entry imaginable, he won a gift certificate for a small drink at a deli, and Bender sympathizes with them by saying that the guy who bullied him is long dead, and Farnsworth can shoot the carrot with an award predictor, which tells them that it'll get second place, so they want to try again. Well, that carrot does look terrible, so it makes some sense that he wouldn't win. He says he needs gold for his death ray, not silver, and somehow it comes alive in the dumpster and jumps out at a rabbit person. Fry says he's gonna watch a movie he rented weeks ago, and he thinks it doesn't matter when he brings it back to the rental store because it has no late fees, for no reason. There won't suddenly be rental stores again in the future. It turns out the Robot Mafia gets hired to force people to return their videos on time, and somehow Fry challenges them and gets hurt. Bender says he has an impossibly large amount of films on disc. He couldn't have every film ever made, because we lost a lot of the original footage for the oldest movies. A robot takes a lame excuse to hurt him, and Bender says it'll help him if he gives him all of his credit cards. And he does. Even though with the amount of money Bender would spend on them with his spending habits, Fry would save a lot of money by just buying movies. Q-Bert sneaks into the professor's lab, and Dwight reaches into a container of particles and finds himself sitting at a microverse diner. Then he's sprayed and is in pain from being returned to normal. And Q-Bert decides to use the Big Mist to make giant vegetables for the fair. Then Amy wants her hairspray and she somehow assumes the Big Mist is that. Why would it look just like it? She takes it and uses it on herself, at least explaining that she's in a hurry for a date. She finds Kif in the bushes because even after a year, he's still nervous around her, and he apologizes. Kif says they have all night for the date because Captain Brannigan went on an all-night eggnog drinking binge and will be passed out for the entire weekend. Then we cut to Fry and Bender. And Bender somehow references passing out from drinking and goes to sleep even though he drinks for fuel. So he only gets drunk when he doesn't drink enough. Then he wakes up because he hears someone on TV talk to a pirate. So he assumes they know about his pirated disc and doesn't look at the TV just to make sure, when it's obviously much more likely that he's wrong about this. So he somehow decides to eat the disc, and somehow this makes him run outside saying Merry Christmas to people. Amy ate 5 buckets of popcorn, so I don't know how she's staying skinny when she has that kind of appetite normally and is casual about it as if it's not brand new, when she used to be fat as a kid. Kif asks her if she wants some more. Then someone tells Kif to tell Amy to move so they could see and spills a drink on him when he uncharacteristically tries to stand up to him instead of being meek like usual. Amy sends the bad guys flying out of the theater, and when she's asked if she got bigger, she somehow thinks that he called her fat even though she's clearly taller than him now, and would be able to see that. Meanwhile, Bender jumps out of a window into a dumpster and is fine because he's a robot. So we see him in a car, and he drives into a gas station and causes some damage, and starts singing about the rainy oil. How does he never get arrested? Amy must have figured out what's going on by now. How couldn't she? So when she's told she couldn't get into the restaurant because she's too big, she tears a hole in the roof and talks with bad grammar. Why would the bigamist make her talk like that? She says she wants everything on the menu. That'll be too expensive, but she's brainwashed into not caring. After Bender steals a chainsaw from out of a window and runs after him, we see that it's taking forever to print out their bill. Kif says he's trying online to get a loan and wonders if he can get his mother's help. She forces him to go with her, and the restaurant owner says to get the mayor on the phone because he owes him a favor and he wants the money. Amy wants to see the sunset, but there's too many buildings, which is why she decides to climb the buildings. At least that tries to explain why I ripped off King Kong properly. Then he actually appreciates the sunset, and says he doesn't care what size she is, there's just more to love. That's impressive, they do love each other. She tries to kiss him, but Bender tries to shoot her with guns from a plane he somehow found. So she falls, Kif tries to stand up to Bender, and it turns out she got caught on a flagpole and is going to be challenged to an impossible fight for dining and dashing. But of course she wins. Too bad it cuts ahead to her winning. But I guess it's better to see more stuff happen instead of seeing a fight scene where she fights people I don't hate who are just doing their job. She's made crazy enough to damage the city, and eventually Kip's made to stretch his limbs and fling Bender over to Amy to knock her out. Inconveniently, it turns out that out of nowhere, the bigamist can wear off over time. She doesn't remember what happened when she was giant. Fry and Bender are told to keep it down because they're filming Calculon's movie. Fry apologizes, and Bender punches out at director for naturally being in a bad mood with him. We don't see his fist hit his face though, but we do see him hit two other guys who didn't do anything. Then Fry calls him a bum and snaps him out of it conveniently. More like the effects finally wore off. So his plot was just a build-up to a joke where he says that piracy really does hurt people in the film industry, because he beat them up. But it doesn't happen literally, so by not showing the actual problems caused by it, it's not being convincing. So Amy had to pay for her dinner and fixing the city. But of course, the story used the fact that she has rich parents to her advantage for it, so it was no big deal. Dwight talked about Amy's rampage in the science fair, somehow showing them a picture and movie made about what she did. They're asked what this has to do with science, and Cubert says it shows the dangers of making kids do science fair projects. So somehow he took until now to tell him that he was responsible for what Amy did, even though he doesn't look scared, so that's not why he took so long to confess to it. Why is he allowed to tell the story about Amy without immediately explaining that he caused it to happen? Why isn't he holding the bigamist? Where is it? Without the bigamist, there's no proof he caused it to happen. He somehow won a prize when they should just be horrified with him that he caused the city to get damaged. And who knows how many people got hurt from that. And Farnsworth is still proud of him for winning the prize when he'd know that he didn't deserve it because he just used his invention. Unrealistically, this causes the people who run the science fair to declare that no more science will be taught in school, and somehow everyone cheers. He wouldn't have the authority to make that possible. Somehow a magician thinks magic will be taught in its place. Bender's then written to promote downloading comic books and shows off a bunch of creator-insulting website names that probably aren't real and are just named that way to insult piracy. I was disappointed to see that no site I recognized was on that list. It'd have taken 2 seconds of Googling to learn about a site like that. And that'd show that they showed their work, and make their point come across better, instead of them having no awareness of any sites with comics at all, and being detached from their audience as a result. It wouldn't make sense that they wouldn't be allowed to name those sites. At no point did the story ever have the self-awareness to have anyone say that sometimes people have to see stuff for free to see if they'll even like it first. And that can lead to them buying it when they definitely wouldn't otherwise. Which I know is true. Someone can pirate a game they were told sucks just to find out they love it and order it. And it's been statistically proven that pirates spend the most money on merchandise. It also fails to consider the idea that sometimes people pirate stories that they already planned on buying later so that they could see it early, because they're so excited for it, and do in fact buy it out of consumer loyalty, which I know is true. The minute I found out from TV tropes that there even were Futurama comics, I immediately planned on buying them at some point. The problem is comics are expensive, especially when they all add up, because there's so many things to buy out there. Oh yeah! And some things are impossible to buy. So you have to see them online. So I can't take this message seriously because it doesn't have the emotional maturity to portray both sides of the argument properly. And instead only argues for one side and shows us only the worst pirates, which will never convince people because they're aware of all of the arguments in favor of it. Not that it'd ever have a chance of convincing people anyways, with the way that it told this in the form of a space whale S-up. Don't pirate stuff! Or, if you're a robot, you'll end up going crazy because you decide to eat a disc and end up punching people in the film industry. We already knew that it was going for an anti-piracy message. We really didn't need Leela and Bender's little bit at the ending there to hammer it in and ruin all of its subtlety. That, and it just came after a nonsensical ending where the writer wasn't even trying to make sense, so I'm not in the mood for respect if I don't respect the writing. Futurama Comic, Issue 34. Amy thanks Farnsworth again for taking the crew out for a night of speed dating at Elzar's. He explains that studies show that workers in relationships are far more obedient. Then it cuts to a few months ago where he sees Hermes' ex-wife nagging him constantly at the kitchen dinner. Why is she with him? I thought she divorced him for Barbados Slim. I guess they got back together. She even says she's nagging him, which isn't realistic. Then we see Farnsworth give Hermes some depressing news. And he said yes dear to him too. I like that it was explained where he got the idea properly. I guess he invited himself to dinner with Hermes on the hunch that this theory was true. Leela explains that he and the woman have to attach the compatibility sensor over their hearts. Somehow the date ends after one short text bubble from Fry. Why would they even have to sit down? Why would they even bother sitting down? Apparently the sensors work by reading their minds and not by recording what they're saying. The sensors would have to read their entire brain. Zoidberg's still trying because he's desperate, and Amy says she's in a relationship and is only here to make her mother happy. Because she realistically wants better grandkids than she'd get from Kif. Somehow Leela agrees to give Morbauer a number despite what he's saying. Somehow a brain slug was allowed to come here. And after I lose some respect for the mayor for wasting a lot of money on a date doctor, Bender overhears and realizes that this kind of scam is a great idea for him to do. And the date doctor has no self-awareness or honesty and doesn't admit that he's right about what he said. After it's all done, everyone hooked up with someone except Fry. Leela just tells Fry to do some self-examination for trying to make other people feel bad. He has a good point in complaining that even Leela found someone, because I thought most people in the future thought Leela was ugly. Fry's so lonely that he misses his 20th century girlfriend, even though she treated him badly and broke up with him. He says he bought her a star from the Star Registry, and asks if it's still named after her. He goes there and it turns out the store associates in 1999 made a mistake when labeling Michelle's star a star. It's actually a planet, which means whoever named the planet is now its rightful owner. How would a planet from outside of the solar system be misidentified as a star? That's impossible for plenty of reasons. It wouldn't be so big, for one. For no reason, Fry says in front of the clerk that he thinks Michelle would take him back if she knew he owned a planet. Thankfully, this doesn't lead to a twist where he says he can't own the planet if his girlfriend broke up with him. It was already confusing that he was allowed to take ownership of a planet 1,000 years after naming it. You'd think people would have already settled on it, or at least started mining it and claimed it. Someone would have claimed it in the 1,000 years he was gone. The next morning, Fry wants to learn everything about his planet from Farnsworth, who's got a headache from the brain slug. Leela's an hour late and apologizes because she had a crazy night. Conveniently, Fry's planet is still uninhabited by any human or alien life forms, even though the atmosphere is exactly like Earth. That's definitely impossible, because the reason Earth's atmosphere is the way it is because of plant life on it, giving it oxygen. And obviously an Earth-like planet would never be mistaken for a star, unless witches cast a spell to make it that way. That's the only way Planet Michelle would be like this. But why would witches cast that spell in the first place? Fry randomly decides to live on that planet so that he won't have to deal with women anymore, when it's immediately obvious he'd get lonely and want to leave quickly because of why solitary confinement's a punishment. He wishes he could live there with Michelle, and he's told that he could use her DNA to find her. Instead of saying he could track her down, he says he could make a Michelle clone in seconds. Wait, wasn't I told earlier that making a clone takes way longer than seconds? Mom started the process of making a Mr. Burns clone, and we were told that it'd take a year. It makes sense that he got better as a scientist since then. Maybe she was basing the cloning process on Farnsworth's outdated science. Then Fry reveals that he has a scrunchie from his wallet that belonged to Michelle. He kept it after she threw it in his face after the last argument in the 20th century. He kept it thinking he'd return it once they got back together. But isn't it obvious that the clone of Michelle wouldn't be any more likely to love him? She recognizes Fry as soon as she walks out of the cloning machine, which means that somehow Farnsworth got her memories from the hair sample. It made more sense in a different show. So if she remembers him, there's really no point doing this if he wasn't going to alter her mind to want to stay with him. But that would be creepy. But if Fry was fine with kissing a fake Leela who was made to kiss him, and Farnsworth makes doomsday devices, then clearly neither of them would be opposed to creating a version of her that loves him and isn't annoying. Farnsworth just naturally assumed he'd object to it though, because he wants Michelle. I thought Fry was going to track down Michelle herself, and then he could have used the memory scanner on her. Fry says that Farnsworth can barely see an inch in front of his face, which has to be a lie to reassure her. I have the biggest smile because Farnsworth is clearly giddy at this and lies that he can barely see anything at all. Just stand there and don't worry about the old blind professor. I love how obviously a lie that is. She wants her scrunchie back, and Amy says she'll give her some clothes to wear. It turns out Michelle doesn't know where and when she is, of course, because she was made from the past Michelle's hair, and not the one who woke up in the future very conveniently. Seriously, what were the chances of his ex-girlfriend, who's also from New York, also being in the future? Fry says Amy can fill her in on all the exposition while he gets dressed, instead of just telling her the truth. After all, she wouldn't believe him until she saw the weird people of the future herself. Leela lectures Fry and reminds him that Michelle couldn't handle living in the future, and it's only a matter of time before her clone leaves Fry too. Fry decides to take her to his planet, even though she could still be a bad girlfriend who doesn't treat him right regardless. So it's immediately obvious that he won't be happy there. He had no reason to like her other than her looks. Fry says he's just a dumb delivery boy no one would miss, and Michelle says they have to get out of here because the future is full of weirdos and the clothes are made for hippos. And Leela says that was her dress from last night, which makes no sense. At first I thought she meant that this was Amy's old dress from when she was a fat kid, but Leela's skinny. A few days later, Michelle thanks Amy for giving her some of her old sweatsuits that she was going to donate to an orphan instead. She compliments her appearance, and I have to agree, but I don't think pink's her color. Fortunately, Hermes is sad that Fry has to leave, and says he knows him so well when he says he has a hard time saying goodbye too. But it doesn't make up for billing Fry for having to make him hire someone else, which must be illegal because I never heard of that. If people could do that, every employer would do it. Fry thanks Leela for reassuring him and says he'll miss her. Fry leaves, and then the crew wonders where Bender is. He's busy being a date doctor and wasting our time. Why would he think they'd take his bad advice? He doesn't have a girlfriend. He might have a point that they come on too strong. They like his ideas because not talking to women means not being rejected. It could work if the idea is they're hoping a woman will eventually talk to them. She hates the planet because it's a forest and she hates camping and won't cook for him, even though she could find out how. And she tells him to find her food and build her a shelter because she's lazy. Oh look, there are aliens here. How did he think otherwise? It takes hours to find her food. She won't let him go to sleep without building her shelter and somehow won't even give him food. This crossed the line. He could have built her shelter and had food for her already there before she got created. That was common sense. A week later, Farnsworth says he sold a replica of his cloning machine to the Red Cross so they could clone volunteers to work on planets struck by natural disasters. Leela's gonna deliver the cloning machine to a nebula that's near Fry's planet, giving Leela an excuse to see how Fry's doing. What a coincidence! Farnsworth says to give Michelle scrunchie to her, and hopes that another of her won't get made. That makes me wonder if that'll happen. Come to think of it, why did he even care enough to say give the scrunchie to her? That'd be more effort than keeping it there. Bender ignores Leela's call and leads his customers into a place with no women and assures them that they'll come here. He tells Leela to pick him up, and Michelle tells Fry that he can chew a tree down for firewood after getting her a purse puppy and a purse. I think she was spoiled. Either that or had terrible parents, so she has a tremendous amount of entitlement. His friends come to visit, and when Bender threatens to leave with the care package because of her, she apologizes and wants it because it has Sudoku. She does need stuff to entertain herself in a place like this, but even Sudoku would only last so long. When Leela tells him about the cloning machine, he decides to get Leela to go to the engine room with an excuse and clone himself to keep up with all the work he's told to do. He hopes the machine won't glitch out and make the clone look better than him. What was he thinking going into it with her scrunchie? He just inconveniently forgot about it right after putting it in his pocket. So the machine's gonna make a combination Fry and her, right? Oh, that's lame. Instead we see a new Michelle who's exactly like Michelle. Bender calls her a tramp when she somehow calls the robot a monster. And somehow the crew doesn't immediately catch on to what Fry did when they see Michelle here with different clothes for no reason. She complains that her food needs more milk, and again, what's with all the fat jokes with Leela? She's not even remotely large. Fry wastes time saying they should do a makeout competition, and then the two Michelles meet. Somehow Bender doesn't figure out what happened. Fry explains himself to the three Michelles and says when the cloning machine didn't work, he kicked it and the scrunchie fell out of his pocket and into it. One of them randomly assumes that she wasn't good enough for him. The one with orange clothes seems to be the nicest one because she says she can't talk to Fry like that. And another one says that Fry's hers. Out of nowhere, it turns out there's a giant amount of Michelles, all whining for Fry to cater to her out of laziness. I can't build shelter or cook either. And pointing out a lot of problems, while not making you evil, is likely to annoy people who are easily annoyed. She did have every reason to hate it here, and it's hard to imagine that anyone wouldn't be bothered by all of its problems. It's just that you'd think she would feel guilty about doing nothing and try to help, because she has nothing else to do here. Leela says this is happening because the scrunchie's still in the cloning machine after it broke, and it won't stop making Michelles until they get it out. Bender looks on the bright side that they've run out of sweatsuits, and Fry thinks there's no way to get back to the ship when the Michelles have every reason to want the machine stopped, and yet they're trying to stop them. It was already a struggle to find food for just 2 people on this planet. So Bender has to extend his legs to walk over them while carrying his friends, and Leela enjoys kicking one of them to get back on the ship. Leela says she'll remove the battery, and Fry says that it's his job to clean up this mess. I like that. And he says the only way his friends will get out of here is if there's a Fry for each Michelle. He's told there must be another way, and Bender says there is, and decides to send his coordinates to the people he scammed to get them to come here to give them all horrible girlfriends. It was boring how the cop just reiterated what Bender did so much when we already know. The Michelles don't want to date Fry because he caused there to be so many of them, and they agree to date the guys Bender brought to them, as well as any clones he might make of them. The genetic diversity in this place would be insanely low. This civilization won't last for very long, especially with every single woman having the same annoying flaws. These men would want off the planet fast, and our main characters quickly proceed to leave the planet and trap them there. Our heroes. And the story ends with Fry naming a star after Leela. It's convenient that there's still stars left unnamed 1,000 years from now at a time period where Earth knows a whole bunch of different planets, who would have named stars themselves. So you'd think every star that's observable by civilization would be named. This was a confusing story because it didn't make any sense that Bender inexplicably thinking that the film he got for free was calling him out on it without even checking first, and eating a disc, even though that wouldn't undo the fact that he pirated something and he was told someone knew about it, would magically cause him to go crazy and start acting like tons of movie characters. Fry goes along for the entire thing and it's just random crazy humor. Meanwhile, Cooper is told that his own science fair project won't win, so he predictably steals from Farnsworth to get something for it, and the bigamist gets used by Amy because she's in a hurry for a date and somehow mistakes it for her hairspray. So her plot wouldn't happen either. Why did the bigamist make her go crazy and then forget everything that she did? Why did it make her hungry and act like she didn't notice her growth? And while she did have a sweet moment with Kip that impressed me, the fact that I was already told that the Simpsons comic had a story where Homer was made a giant is another thing that makes the story unimpressive, because it ripped that off too. Out of ideas, just make a character giant. Even Flynn did it to Vector once to rip off Godzilla. The ending was nonsensical, having Q-Bert win instead of getting in huge trouble, and having someone who loves science happily make a declaration against it like an echidna. This story had 2 subplots that were really predictable and repetitive, and kind of boring as a result. It was immediately obvious that a clone Michelle wouldn't be any better of a girlfriend just because she's trapped with Fry on another planet he conveniently has himself. Especially considering the miserable life she was given. At least her complaints were understandable. But she crossed the line saying that he couldn't eat, She was right to be mad because he didn't think to have shelter built and food ready as soon as she got there for no reason. But she was so unlikable the whole time, not having enough of a conscience to even so much as try to help him. It's hard to believe that even Fry would be dumb enough to try this plot. And after meeting a date doctor at a speed dating place that Farnsworth took his employees to for making them more obedient, Bender scams people out of money with bad dating advice that involves not even talking to the women, and eventually lures them to Planet Michelle to be used as the worst kinds of slaves for the Michelles. They're also trapped there as the protagonists leave. So that's pretty sad.